Most people believe manipulation is easy to recognize. They imagine a dishonest person, a liar, a scammer, someone obviously trying to deceive others. But real manipulation rarely looks like that. In fact, the most effective manipulation often feels completely normal. It can come from a friend, a family member, a romantic partner, a coworker. Sometimes it even comes from people who genuinely care about us. Because manipulation is not always driven by evil intentions. Sometimes it is driven by fear, insecurity, control, neediness, or the desperate desire to get a particular outcome. This is what makes manipulation so difficult to identify. It often hides behind emotions that appear understandable. At its core, manipulation is surprisingly simple. It is an attempt to influence another person's behavior without being completely honest about the intention. Instead of communicating directly, the manipulator attempts to create pressure. Sometimes that pressure comes through guilt, sometimes through fear, sometimes through praise, sometimes through silence. But the goal remains the same: to control another person's decision. Many people assume manipulation only happens between powerful individuals and vulnerable victims. Reality is far more complicated. Human beings manipulate each other every day. Children manipulate parents. Parents manipulate children. Employees manipulate managers. Partners manipulate each other. Friends manipulate friends, often without fully realizing what they are doing. Because manipulation frequently develops as a learned survival strategy. Imagine a child growing up in an environment where direct communication is ignored. Every time they express their needs honestly, nobody listens. Eventually, they discover another strategy. Perhaps they cry. Perhaps they create guilt. Perhaps they become passive-aggressive, and suddenly people respond. Over time, the behavior becomes reinforced. The child learns, direct communication doesn't work. Indirect pressure does. Years later, the same strategy continues into adulthood, not because the person is malicious, but because it became familiar. Carl Jung believed that many destructive behaviors originate in unconscious processes. We often imagine ourselves acting for noble reasons, yet hidden motives operate beneath the surface. This is especially true when it comes to manipulation. Few people wake up and think, "Today I will manipulate someone." Instead, they justify their behavior. They convince themselves they are helping, protecting, teaching, guiding. Meanwhile, their unconscious desire for control remains hidden. One of the most common forms of manipulation is guilt. Almost everyone has experienced it. After everything I've done for you, or I guess I just don't matter, or if you really cared about me, you would do this. The conversation is no longer about the actual issue. It becomes about emotional pressure. The goal is not understanding. The goal is compliance. Another common form is fear. Fear-based manipulation appears everywhere. People exaggerate consequences, create panic, predict disasters, suggest terrible outcomes, all to influence behavior. The intention may be conscious or unconscious, but the effect remains the same. Fear reduces independent thinking, and manipulation thrives when independent thinking disappears. There is also manipulation through approval. This type is especially difficult to recognize because it feels positive. Someone constantly praises you, makes you feel special, makes you feel understood, then slowly begins directing your decisions, your loyalty, your attention, your behavior. The approval becomes a reward system, and rewards can be just as controlling as punishments. This is why manipulation is not always aggressive. Sometimes it appears incredibly friendly, Perhaps the most dangerous form of manipulation is self-manipulation. Most people spend their lives looking for manipulators outside themselves, yet they rarely examine how they manipulate their own minds. We justify unhealthy habits, excuse destructive behavior, ignore obvious truths, create stories that protect our ego. The human mind is remarkably skilled at avoiding discomfort, and sometimes manipulation becomes the mechanism through which we avoid reality. This is one reason self-awareness is so important. The more conscious we become of our motivations, the harder it becomes for manipulation to operate unnoticed, both from others and from ourselves. So how do we protect ourselves? The answer is not suspicion. The answer is awareness. Awareness changes everything. When someone attempts to create guilt, pause. When someone attempts to create fear, pause. When someone attempts to pressure you emotionally, pause. Ask yourself a simple question. If this emotion were removed, what would I actually think? This question is powerful because manipulation often depends on emotional urgency. The manipulator wants a reaction. Awareness creates reflection, and reflection weakens manipulation. Boundaries are equally important. People who struggle with boundaries often become easy targets, not because they are weak, but because they prioritize harmony over honesty. Manipulators quickly recognize this tendency. They learn which buttons produce results, which pressures work, which tactics succeed. The moment boundaries appear, the dynamic changes. The manipulator encounters resistance, and resistance reveals intentions. Healthy people may dislike your boundaries, but they eventually respect them. Manipulative people often become angry when boundaries appear, because boundaries reduce control. This reaction tells you more than any words ever could. There's a final lesson hidden inside all of this. Manipulation survives in darkness. Honesty survives in light. The healthiest relationships are not built on pressure. They are built on transparency, direct communication, mutual respect, personal responsibility. The more honestly people communicate, the less manipulation becomes necessary. This is why maturity matters. Mature individuals ask. They do not pressure. They explain. They do not guilt. They do not control. And perhaps that is the greatest protection of all. The willingness to face reality directly, without games, without pressure, without hidden agendas. Because manipulation gains power when awareness disappears. But the moment awareness returns, its influence begins to fade. And once you learn to recognize manipulation, you stop reacting automatically. You start thinking independently. And that may be one of the most valuable psychological skills a person can ever develop.